I'm, that's right. I was just going to say we'll be recording this morning, just so that everybody knows that. And let's see, the recording will only be used for, we'll be sending it out to any of the members who weren't able to be here this morning. And sometimes we share it with folks who might be thinking about becoming a Healing Hearts member. So let's see, today, where am I? Sorry about that. Got all distracted with the music. I got to get used to this. So today we're going to be talking about Hartley House's abuse intervention program. And before we do that, I just want to again put out my my little warning that sometimes the things that we talk about in these briefings could be difficult to hear. And if at any time you're feeling like you need to just take a break, turn off your camera, or go away from the call, that's all good. Just remember our 24-hour hotline is here for you too. That number is going to be on the chat, right, Jen? We'll have that on the chat for you in case you need it. And also, before we jump into the program, I'd like to introduce our president and executive director, Dr. Inga James, and she's going to kind of get us started. Morning, Inga.
Hi, good morning, everybody. Great to see you all here. Today, we're going to talk about part of our services that people don't usually talk about, and that's our abuse intervention program. Maryland is unique in that if an organization receives domestic violence funding through the state or the federal government, that organization is required to provide services for offenders. And I'll talk a little bit more about the pros and cons of that legislation in a little bit, but I wanted to fill you in on our abuse intervention program and tell you a little bit about what's going on at the local level with regards to these programs and what's going on at the statewide level. So one of the things I'd like to really emphasize with regards to this is abuse intervention is not anger management. People tend to confuse the two. We do not look at domestic violence or offender behavior as anger. We look at it as power and control. And so one of the things I like to tell people is, although we've been having more and more officer shootings when responding to domestic violence calls in the country, generally, of people who abuse their spouses do not fight anybody else. They do not have an anger problem out in the community. It's about controlling their partner. And so whether the abuse is physical, emotional, financial, whatever type of abuse it is, we deal with that specifically. So we have our abuse program is a 26-week group program. So an offender is usually referred by probation and parole. Generally, we sometimes have people self-refer, and those are few and far between, of course. But we run it as a group because that is a best practice for abusers. Abusers tend to be manipulative, heavily in denial, victim blaming. So when you put them together in a group and people and these abusers advance in their treatment, they start calling each other out. And that's why group work is best, because participants will start calling people out, correcting people on their statements, their co-participants. And so we rarely do individual work because of how manipulative an abuser can be. And within this group work, we have two facilitators. One is James Duguay, as you will meet later, and the other is Brenda Lee. So we have a man and a woman working together for several reasons, and that works very well. One reason is because it's a role model of how healthy relationships can work, how respect can work. And so role modeling is very important. The other thing is that the men in the abuse group tend to treat the female facilitator differently than the male facilitator because of their rigid gender roles that they have. And so they think of women as being controllable, or they hope they are. So when an abuser is referred, he's told, and right now I'm saying he because we only have a men's group at this point. He's informed that he needs to complete the program to get off probation. So he needs to come to our 26-week intervention. We run 2 groups a week, and then 2 groups, and then 2 full sessions a year. Let me talk a little bit about that legislation I was telling you about, where abuse intervention services are required of organizations that receive domestic violence government funding. That has a very, it's very beneficial. Not all states have this legislation. And what you find is generally organizations won't pick up abuse interventions because it's not a money-making, and in fact, actually, it's a draining. It drains the budget, and so it's not attractive. Plus, most organizations in the community don't know how to work with offenders, and that makes total sense. And so they're not apt to look to pick up an abuse intervention group. But in Maryland, every single county has one because the law requires it. It's unfunded, unfortunately, so we don't get any funding from the state to provide these services. These are the only services at Hartley House that are not free, and we require the participants to pay per session. However, that does not support the program even a little bit, to be honest with you. So we really rely on donations like yours in order to be able to provide these mandatory services that we can't get money for. AIP programs have to pass through a state certification process. Right now, the Family Violence Council at the state level, which is a council of the Governor's Office on Crime Prevention, Youth and Victim Services. That council is the certifying body. For AIP, we get certified every 3 years. Monitoring is very loose to non-existent. We don't really hear from them much in between those certification periods. And one thing we'll talk a little bit more about in a minute is that there are actually 2 AIPs in Frederick County. There's Hartley Houses, of course, and then Catoctin Counseling also has an abuse intervention program. Research has shown us some interesting things about whether these services work or not. A couple years, they did a study in the state of Maryland with AIP providers, and they found that the individuals who successfully complete the program have significantly lower rates of recidivism on all criminal charges. So we're impacting not only just with regards to violence in the home, but with regards to all criminal activity. This research looked at 1,900 offenders in the state, and only 40% of those offenders successfully completed the program. It's hard to complete a 26-week program, and especially for people who are kind of in this situation in their life, and generally their life tends to be pretty chaotic, or they're facing a lot of challenges. So they had up to 30% fewer violent offenses compared to those who failed to complete an AIP. So those 40% were showing far fewer violent offenses, and not only in the home, but in the community. And there's a lot of research going on at the national level as well. There's research into different models of intervention. We'll talk about the models in a minute. And one thing that the national research has shown definitively, though, is that groups need to be organized differently. The curriculum needs to address different challenges for abusers of color. So what has been created along the years is not good for everybody, and we have to keep remembering that. There are a lot of things going on at the state level right now because the certification process is so loose. There are some things that the state has become concerned about with regards to some programming. There is a coalition called the Maryland Abuse Intervention Coalition, and they are the ones leading this charge to look more closely at certification of AIPs in the state. There are several models of intervention. I won't go into all of them, but I will tell you the Duluth model is the intervention that we use. Where do you think that came from? Obviously, the Domestic Abuse Intervention Program in Duluth, Minnesota created the Duluth model. And it's about more than just abuse intervention. It's actually really about how to create a coordinated community response to domestic violence, and abuse intervention is only a part of that. And if you know anything about the Power and Control Wheel, that organization in Duluth also created the Power Control Wheel and the Equality Wheel. This is the model that we follow, and we're always looking at updating it and building on best practices and bringing in new research. The other model that's creating concern at the state level is the medical model, and this is a model that Catoctin Counseling uses. A medical model requires that the participant be given a diagnosis. Domestic violence providers greatly disagree with providing a diagnosis for offenders because offenders can hide behind a diagnosis. We don't, and further, most of us are not into diagnosing. But offenders can say, I can't help myself, I have bipolar disorder, or whatever it might be. And the reason that requires a diagnosis is so these organizations can collect insurance. And so the state is very concerned about these types of programs that are not using best practices and are instead providing an escape route actually for offenders. The state's also looking at concerns about abuse intervention programs such as Catoctin, and not having good relationships or consistent relationships with the victim service providers in their community. So there's no connection between offender treatment and victim treatment. And that's pretty much the way it is with Catoctin in our community. We don't have much of a relationship with them. So we try to, but we've always been separate entities. So the state's concerned about that because they believe we should be unified in working with offenders and victims. At the local level, we are about 6 months into the new Domestic Violence Coordinating Council, which was legislated a couple of years ago by the Frederick County Council. I happen to chair the Offender Programming and Policy Committee. And so we'll be looking at what's going on in the community with regards to programming and what kind of policy should we advocate for. And Hartley House, of course, is always interested in improving our program, being more impactful, and we always are following best practices and learning about new ways to do things. So that's actually a lot about abuse intervention as we see it. And so I wanted to turn it over to Nikki again, or James Duguay, I don't know.
I'll take it from here.
Thank you.
Thank you, Inga. So Inga gave us a really good kind of foundation of what the abuse intervention program is about and the participants that we serve. And James, I want to introduce you to James Duguay. James has a bachelor's degree in communication and a master's in community counseling from West Virginia University. He's been with Hartley House for 16 years and started as the abuse intervention program co-facilitator. And he's been the AIP coordinator for the last 4.5 years. James and I are going to talk a little bit about, because Inga just kind of set the big broad framework. But I think the way, as we have in the past, the way we can learn about the services best is to hear about the clients that we serve. And as Inga had said, some folks come to our program because they are, and most come because they are court ordered to do so, and some come of their own accord. We're going to talk about 2 clients so that you can hear about 2 people this morning. And James recently told me about a client, and of course we're not using real names, but it's the client Tom, who is a 55-year-old truck driver, and he completed the program and then some. But James, could you tell us a little bit about him and his story?
Okay. First and foremost, welcome, and I appreciate you guys sitting in and listening and participating in this conversation that needs to be had around about the gentleman in the county and throughout. So basically, Tom came into our program about 3 years ago, and when Tom came in, Tom was very, how I would say, he was very apprehensive about participating in the program. Tom is not necessarily an anomaly in terms of being apprehensive, because most of the guys coming into the program are very apprehensive about participating in the AIP programs, because for the most part, most guys who come into the programs don't believe that they should be in an AIP program, especially if they haven't necessarily crossed the threshold and been physically abusive to their partners. So if they haven't been physically abusive to their partners, they don't necessarily see, why should I be in this program? This is for men who hit their partners, and that's not what I'm here. That's not what I've done. So I shouldn't be here. So the process with Tom was very eye-opening for Tom. And the reason being is that Tom came into a situation where Tom didn't necessarily disclose his feelings, didn't necessarily talk about his thought process or with anybody. So all of a sudden, Tom is in a situation where Tom has to actually speak his truth and talk to me and talk to the other guys in the group as to what's going on in his household. So you can imagine Tom never meeting me and never having conversated with any of the gentlemen in the program is going to be very apprehensive about that. So Tom didn't necessarily want to participate, and Tom, at the beginning of the program, was very closed off and didn't want to participate. And when he did participate, he would blurt out things that showed that he was passive aggressive in his disposition and with his answers. So after groups from time to time, I would have conversations with Tom and to tell Tom, this is where you're going right now isn't working. What do we need to do to get you to the place where you can be more receptive to the information? And I kind of knew that for the most part, because this is what typically happens with most of these guys, is that over time, the process will take over if they're open to the idea of doing things differently. And Tom wanted to do things differently because Tom had two young grandkids living with him. And Tom had a wife, and he lived on a farm, a horse farm, and with his wife and his two grandkids. And the reason why he had access to his kids, or he had custody of his kids, was because his daughter was in recovery for addictions recovery. So he had access to his kids, but he also was trying to discipline his kids the way he disciplined his daughter, which was a concern for his wife, because she thought he was, on some instances, a little too aggressive in his belief system and how he disciplined. And so in turn, he and his wife would get into it, and he would be verbally abusive to his wife and emotionally abusive to his wife as well. So Tom's wife felt that he was disrespecting her, and he was disrespecting their kids and grandkids. So eventually, the process for Tom took a turn when he had a conversation with his wife further along the way, where he was actually able to see that how his belief system and the way he interacted with his wife, in terms of always discounting her thoughts and thinking that what she said had no merit. And eventually, he started to make a change in his outlook as to how he spoke to his wife. And that translated in the group also, because the group is a rolling enrollment, meaning that guys are always coming in and guys are always leaving the group. It's a 26-week program, which is 6 months, and it's court mandated by the state of Maryland that they complete 26 weeks. So we have guys who are in their third week, we have guys who are in their 14th week, and we have guys who are in their final weeks in the program. So the expectation for most guys is that as they're entering their final months in the final weeks, that they're able to take more responsibility for their behaviors and whatnot. So Tom was finally able to start make the necessary transitions that we are looking for in most of these guys within the 4th and 5th month is when we start to see that, which was good for Tom, because when those things occur, those guys will start to challenge the other guys that are newer in the group in their thought process. Because most oftentimes when you ask a gentleman in the group, so what got you in this group? The blame automatically goes to their spouse. Well, she did this, she did that, and she's bipolar. She's all these things, but there's no ownership of their behaviors whatsoever. Because Tom had been able to start taking responsibility for himself, he recognized himself in these guys who were new in the program, and Tom was in turn able to start now questioning them and also putting them on the spot. Why do you think that way? And challenging each other. And the process of the group is, as a facilitator, I can do all of the challenging, but the group works better when guys that have started to buy into the program start to challenge as well. Now, as a facilitator, I have to make sure that when they do challenge, they do it appropriately, because you don't want them to do inappropriately in the way they challenge other person's thinking. And the premise of challenging somebody's thinking is not to say you're wrong in your thinking, it's to expand on as to why do you think the way you think? What other methods could you have chosen? What other behaviors do you think you could have decided to do that could have probably avoided the situation that you're in right now with your spouse and with your relationships and whatnot? So those are the things that we want them to do, and those are the things that we want to see when we want them to be able to open up other avenues of thinking, as opposed to rigid thinking that this is my way or the highway. This is the only way that things need to happen. If it doesn't happen this way, there's an issue for my spouse, there's an issue for the kids in the house and whatnot. So Tom was able to progress through this process. And eventually Tom graduated from the program in the 6th month. But the thing about Tom is not just Tom, but it tends to happen from time to time. Tom decided that he enjoyed the program enough that Tom stayed an additional year in the program. And that doesn't always happen, but we see guys who who will start to buy into the program so much that this is their place, their safe space, where they can actually verbalize their thinking and their issues. And when they have issues with their spouses, if they're still together with their spouses, they bring it to the group and they help each other solve how to better behave or how to better receive information that they've gotten from the spouse and process it. They process it with the group and they help each other out. And that in turn helps in the household. And they also start to take more ownership of their behaviors from that. And they don't necessarily see their spouse as the person who put them in this program. They see themselves as my behavior is the reason why I'm here. And that's what we want to see from that. So Tom, after was with us for an additional year, and I don't want to say that he was a co-facilitator, but in essence, he was an integral part of the program when he was in the program for that period of time, because he was the person that at points when guys would say things that were not necessarily appropriate or inappropriate, but would say things that need to be questioned. He did so as well as myself, and as well as the co-facilitator Brenda and other guys who were further along in the program. And that's what you want to see with guys, is that as they start to take ownership with their behaviors, they're able to recognize some of their same old behaviors in new participants who are coming into the program and able to challenge that thinking also. So the process is always evolving. Now, does this mean that everybody is saved per se? No, it doesn't mean. But what you want them to be able to do is you want them to be able to recognize that, you know what, and this is the analogy that I use with these guys, is that you've been on a 2-lane highway. So you always use the same exit ramps. So my job as a co-facilitator is to create a 5-lane highway, a 6-lane highway, where there are more exit ramps where you can decide, you know what, taking this exit is not beneficial to me or my spouse. So maybe I need to go further down the road and figure out another exit to take that's going to be beneficial to me and my spouse, to make it work and be applicable for me. And that's the process with these guys in the AIP program.
That's great, James. That's really cool. And there's something else that I remember you sharing that really made the connection for me about generational abuse. And that was when he recognized that his behavior may well have affected his daughter and
Yes.
her addictive behavior. And that's the reason now he has his grandchildren, because his daughter is having problems. That's just incredible. That has to be an incredible moment for the participant and for you when those connections get made.
Yes. And we typically, like I said, we start to see that the transition midpoint in the program, like you were saying, generational. I've had grandfathers, sons, and grandsons in the program. So I've had 3 generations in the household. And the ones who were able to make the changes was the son and the grandson. The grandfather, he was stuck in his ways. He was, this is how I am. I'm not going to make these changes and whatnot, which is unfortunate. But the ability for the son and the grandson, as they were in their own prospective relationships, because abuse, most of these guys, in terms of the demographics is very all-encompassing. I have Caucasian, African American, Hispanic. I have Asian. I have every race, and I have almost in every age group. I've had guys as old as 92 in the group to as young as 18 in the group. I've had police officers in the group. I've had people that work in the White House in the group. I've had soldiers in the group. I've had homeless people in the group. I've had doctors. So every socioeconomic group can fall into this situation where they end up in the program. Typically, most of the guys that are in the program are court ordered, but we also tend from time to time get guys who have decided that maybe I have issues and I need to put myself I need to get myself into a program. I need to get help for myself. And most oftentimes with abusers is that there has to be an intervention for the light bulb to occur. And the intervention doesn't necessarily mean that law enforcement has to be called and need to get hauled off to jail to start to make changes. The intervention could be that possibly they understand that I'm going to lose my spouse, so I need to make changes. The intervention could be maybe the neighbors heard and they're so embarrassed that they need to make changes. The intervention could be that they see how it's affecting their kids. But people who generally are abusive in their relationships typically won't change their behaviors if an intervention doesn't occur and they don't necessarily see it as a consequence of their behaviors. Because abuse in its raw form because it's about power and control. There is a benefit to being abusive. They don't necessarily see the cost of the abuse. The cost is usually in the around the corner, so they don't see it. But being abusive right now allows me to get something that I need right now, and the need may be something that isn't neither negative or positive. It may be a genuine need, but the way they express that desire to get that need is what's the issue. So it may be that I feel conflicted when maybe I'm the only person, I'm the head of the household, and my spouse isn't working, and she's a stay-at-home mom. And when I come home in the house, because this is what I tend to hear from these guys, this is why I'm going to go down tell this narrative, is that sometimes they feel, well, I work all day and she's home, and I come in the house and the house is dirty and the house is this, the house is that, and they don't seem to understand that even though their wives or their girlfriends are in the household, they're taking care of young kids. They're doing their part. They see themselves as being the only people who are doing their part. So trying to get them to understand that you doing your part doesn't mean that your partner's not doing their part. And trying to get them to shift the idea and to understand that it's a partnership, and that even if you are upset with your spouse because you feel your wife isn't pulling her weight, how do you ask for what you need? How do you ask for what you would like to see in the household? You can easily bulldoze your way and get what you want, but that's to the detriment of your relationship. That's to the detriment of how your kids see you and how your spouse starts to see you. Or you can ask for what you want. Now, because I said being abusive is about power control and it's about immediate gratification, sometimes it becomes addictive. Because if I can ask my spouse for something, and that gives her a chance to say no to me, or I can say, do this, and she knows what the consequences of the behaviors are, and so she's more likely going to do it. So sometimes it's almost a drug intoxicating that they may want to be abusive because there isn't going to be a no. There's only going to be a yes. So it's trying to get them to transition to understand that, yes, you're getting a need met right then and there, but what is the cost? The cost could be you possibly losing your job. The cost could be possibly you losing your family. The cost could be you possibly losing your freedom. Is it worth it? Is it working for you? Is it working for your partner? Because the prospect about you and your partner is that when you guys got together, you want it to be a loving situation. Is this a loving situation? And the ability for them to look inside themselves and see, you know what, this doesn't work. This may work for me, but it's not working for my partner. What do I need to do? What do I need to do? What kind of changes can I make? So trying to get them to have some form of empathy for their partners, because if they're not unable to be empathize with their partners, then for the most part, they're not going to be successful in their relationships.
James, this is amazing work that you're doing. I'm really curious to know what keeps you going. What keeps you doing this?
What keeps me going is because I've been doing it for so long, is that having direct impact in the families, having direct impact with these guys, because if you can move these guys along in the continuum where they can process and be better individuals, it's safer for everybody in the household. It creates a better barrier for everyone. It can possibly remove somebody being killed, basically, a child being killed, a mom losing a child losing a parent, most likely mom or whatnot, a child losing dad, most likely dad being removed from the household because he's unable to control his anger. So if you can keep the family together where it's a healthy situation for all individuals involved, that's what you want to do. So the direct impact with working with the perpetrators coincides with working with the victims, because there has to be, the men have to see that what they're doing, it has an impact not only on themselves or on their partners, but also on their kids and on the community as a whole.
So I also remember you saying that a lot of the guys talk about how they wish they had known this sooner.
Yes, most of the guys who come in this group, this is the narrative that I hear a lot. I wish I had this when I was in high school. I wish there was a program like this that taught how to be in relationships in high school. We all went through home ec in school, but we don't necessarily didn't have how are you to be properly behave in relationships, and what is abuse and what constitute abuse and whatnot. So we talk, a lot of them wish that they had these things in the school systems when they were in middle school, possibly in high school, as to how to be in a positive individual in their relationships, and how to be able to when they get upset, what do they need to do to how can they validate their partners and validate themselves in a non-abusive way, how to interact with their partners and get their needs met without feeling that they have to try and take it from their partner and whatnot. And one of the things that we talk about in the group is that because a lot of them may not have gone with the physical aspect, we talk about the fact that abuse is a process. How I explain that to them is that no one in this program came in when you first met your significant other. You didn't come in and tell on your first date, curse her out, because there wouldn't have been a second date. You didn't tell her to shut up on the first date or stop talking or whatnot. That happened in a continuum of, at some point you felt comfortable enough to say things that were inappropriate to her or demand things. And there may not have been a lot of pushback from your partner. And so you seized on that. And that's the route that you took. So I want them to see that in the beginning, you never thought about calling her out of her name, but now here you are calling out of her name. In the beginning of your relationship, you never thought about isolating her from her friends. Now here you are isolating her from her friends. In the beginning of your relationship, you never thought about minimizing your behaviors and whatnot. Now here you are minimizing your behaviors and making her feel crazy and making her feel like she's the one that's always at fault. But now here you are. So just because you haven't gone into the physical aspect doesn't mean that you can't get there, because I can guarantee you most of you didn't think that you would get where you are right now in your relationship. And here you are right now. So just to get into the process that just because you haven't crossed that threshold doesn't mean that you can't, because the ones who crossed that threshold in the group never thought they would cross that threshold either. So get them to understand that. So maybe I need to work on myself, because I don't want to be like John and the other side in the group, because he's already disclosed he's been physically abusive to his spouse. Maybe I need to look into my behavior and say, you know what, enough is enough. I want to keep it where it's at right here, and dial it back a bit, dial it back a lot per se, and figure out a better way to communicate with my partner.
Do you find that that folks who come to the program of their own accord versus being court ordered, do they go through the process faster? I wanted to kind of shift for a minute and talk about John, who is one of those clients.
John came to us also a couple of years ago, and when John was trying to save his marriage, he had 2 young kids with his spouse, and he was trying to save his marriage, and his wife had given him an alternative. And you can do something, get help, or I'm leaving. So John was motivated to try and do something. So he came into the program, and he was apprehensive because he didn't know he belonged in the program and whatnot. But eventually, John went into the program, and because he wanted to work the program, he was able to recognize earlier on what his abuses were. His wasn't physical either, but his was more of the emotional neglect, not being there, not being present in the relationship. Because a lot of guys, if you would say to your to them, isolating yourself from your partner emotionally is abusive, and they may not recognize that. So getting them to understand that changes the dynamic of the relationship, and getting them to understand how isolating themselves emotionally withdrawn from their relationships is abusive, because it's a tactic used as a punitive measure when they're upset with their spouses. They isolate, they don't talk, they don't want no communication whatsoever, and they go into their man caves and whatnot. And that's what John was doing. And so eventually John was able to understand that what he was doing was about punishing his spouse. It wasn't about avoiding conflict. It was more about punishing his spouse when he felt that there was an infraction on him, where she felt that she was being mean to him, or he disagreed with her. This was how he handled the situation. So when John was able to transition from that, he started to take ownership of his behaviors. And in turn, like the other guys who progressed further in the group, he started to challenge other guys taking notes, which is what we want to see in the program. Now, John's story was that John was able to better himself and improve on himself, but their marriage ended regardless because his wife had already decided that this wasn't for her, and they separated. But the beauty of it is that even though they separated, he was able to accept the ending of the marriage. Oftentimes in abusive relationships, guys are not able to accept the ending, and that suggests to you and tells them that it's unhealthy if you're unable to accept the ending. There's nothing wrong with being sad and upset that your relationship is over, but what do you do with that when you've understood that the relationship is over? Are you able to pick yourself up and carry on, or are you stalking your partner? Are you excessively calling your partner? Are you threatening to take away the kids? Are you showing up at her job, at her work site, and threatening her and whatnot, and risking her losing her job because you're unable to deal with the fact that you've lost, the relationship is over? John was able to accept that. And because he was able to accept that, he now has a positive co-parenting with his ex-wife. They're civil to each other. They're not buddies, but they're able to co-parent their kids effectively. And he's better off for that, and his kids are better off for that.
That's
And
great.
his ex-wife is better off for that.
And his kids are better off for it. And now his kids have
Yes.
Are seeing the model of a relationship that can work.
Yes.
Right. That's really cool. I am so grateful you're here. I'm so grateful for the work that you're doing, James, and helping our clients and helping our families. I wonder if anyone might have any questions for James. We've got a few more minutes. It's just an interesting topic. Yeah, Julie and Sam.
Yes, hi, James. Boy, golly, what great work. Thank you very much. For that. I felt like I was in a session. How frequent are the sessions, and how many people do you have at one time? I know it varies, the number of people, but that certainly has got to impact the way you roll out your treatment.
Yes. So basically, there's a 5 p.m. group and there's a 6:15 p.m. group every Mondays, and it's two groups, and they meet every Mondays for 26 weeks.
Okay. So
26 weeks. Oh yeah, 1 hour long. Every Mondays, and so because of COVID has been I don't want to say a blessing, but COVID has exposed a lot in the community in terms of the need for the AIP program, because with COVID, our numbers skyrocketed because guys and gals were in the house together. So whatever issues that they had with each other, because they weren't able to go to work and separate, it exacerbated the situations, and guys ended up being in the program a lot more. So the numbers has unfortunately skyrocketed. And right now in one group, I have 18 guys. In another group, I have 10 guys. And I've got a ton of referrals to pull through to get guys in. Whereas before COVID, the numbers would be between both groups would be about 18 total. Now we're more in the 35s and 40 range between both groups. And it's been consistent since COVID. And also because we were doing in person before, now we're doing virtual, which allows access to get more guys into the group, because when we were doing in person before, we were constrained by the space of the room, and also by availabilities for the guys. If they had to drive, get off work and be there, sometimes they would miss group. But because now we're doing it virtually, that we're able to impact more guys at one time, as opposed to when we're doing in person.
So is a 10-person group versus an 18-person group, which is more easy to manage?
They're both the same. There really isn't any difference.
So
there may be a lot more people conversating. There may be a lot more participation because there's more guys in the 18 with the 18s 18 people, participants, but all in all, it still flows the same.
And what is the cost?
The cost for the group is, there's a cost for them is they should be paying $30 a group. So $30 per sessions. So now here's the thing about that. It's easy to say that they should be paying because part of the service contract is they have their fees due, but the state of Maryland doesn't require that they have to pay. If they can't pay, we still have to take the guys into the group. If the guys don't pay, we still have to take them into the group, because once they're referred, it's our obligation to, if they fit the program, meaning if they fit the bill, if we feel they would benefit from the program, if they feel they're not going to be a detriment to the group, because ultimately during the intake process, I can decide whether this gentleman is a good fit for the program. I'm not going to take anybody who is going to destroy the cohesiveness of the group, or who has shown that he's not going to work out for him. Like, one of the things that we talk about in orientation is that, what do you think you would get out of the group? And a lot of them will say, I think it'll help me with my anger. I think it'll help me see things differently. But if somebody tells me, I don't think I need this group, I don't need anything, and they all believe that they don't, but they'll tell me something that I want to hear, per se, because they don't know me from a can of paint. So I don't expect them to be upfront and truthful about anything. But what you want to see is that they have some level of accountability to understand that I'm here for something. I need to get something out of this program.
And if you're paying for something, you often get more out.
Yes. But now the thing, because of everybody's socioeconomic situation is going to be different, there are some guys who are able to afford it, and there are some guys who are unable to afford it. And so there's sometimes we can use a sliding scale for those who are unable to afford paying the full $30 based off their income.
So do you make your determination who gets in based upon the orientation, or does the orientation come after you've made your selection?
The orientation comes first, and based off of the orientation and the conversation I've had with them, and if they feel they should be in the program and they want to participate, then they come into the program. And they may be court ordered, because I have a good relationship. If the guys are court ordered, then I know the probation officers, and I have a good relationship with all the probation officers in the Frederick that work with the offenders. So I have a lot of dialogue with their probation officers, and I send monthly reports and sometimes weekly reports on certain individuals, so that we know what's going on with the guys.
Mm-hmm.
And if I have issues with them and any concerns with them, I also speak with the probation officers about them as well. And sometimes we have guys who are referred from DSS because there are young kids involved. So then I have to have those communications with the DSS workers as well.
So what percentage of those who come to you are you having to reject?
It's not many. Maybe, I want to say about maybe 3%. For the most part, they get in. Like, I had a gentleman one time who I met him in the orientation, and excuse my French, but his first word was like, "You're a traitor." And I was like, "What?" He says, "You work with those bitches over there," meaning the Hartley House. And he obviously wasn't going to get in the group, because his belief system was that all women are bad, and anybody associated with women, anything, I could see he would hurt the cohesiveness of the group. He's an individual that the process would probably have to be some type of individual first, a little bit of individual, and possibly later down the road get into the group. So sometimes they'll show their true colors earlier on, and then you can reject them fairly quickly.
Yeah. Just thank you so very, very much for your work. Great job. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Any other thoughts or questions? Anyone want to share?
I would like to say there's a great need in Frederick County for Spanish speaking AIP groups. And we at this point do not have the capacity to provide that. So we're always looking at ways to be able to expand so that we can work better with the Spanish speaking population.
Mm-hmm.
And another thing also, in terms of the program, being that we went virtual, what happened also is that when we went virtual, a lot of the other agencies around the state had not gone virtual. And so we were getting referrals from Montgomery County, from Harford County, from other jurisdictions asking about our AIP program. So around over the summertime, the past couple of years, we were getting sprinkles of other guys from other jurisdictions because they weren't running effective AIP programs virtually that was working for them. So probation officers recognize that and speak to each other and say, hey, can I send some of my guys to Frederick County and can we work with them? And I made some concessions. I try to keep our numbers mostly Frederick, but for the sake of partnering with other jurisdictions, we took a couple guys from other jurisdictions because it looks better for everybody around if we're all working together.
So one more question, James, too. How do we know that this is working?
How do we know whether it's working? Because we do follow-ups a year out. We call the spouses of these guys and ask if they're together. We ask them what's going on in the house or what's happening. And they most oftentimes they say he's better, he's improved. And also we talk to probation officers. Has he caught any new charges? Are there any new incidences occurring and whatnot? If there isn't any new incidences occurring within the next year after discharge from the program, then he's deemed successful.
That's great. That's great. And what percentage of the guys are successful?
A good 90% of them are successful coming out of the program.
That's got to feel great. That's got to
Yes.
feel great. Sam, you had something else?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I don't mean to dominate here, but is there an attempt, a desire to go back to in person, or the virtual is allows you to reach more people?
The virtual allows us to reach more people. The virtual is my experience so far in the past 2 years compared to the past 14 years before has been more effective.
Great.
So your intention is to stay in virtual?
Well, the state is okay with us staying virtual. So if the state was to say, no, we want you guys to go back in person, then we'd have to go back in person. But if the state is going to allow it to stand as it, then it benefits us to stay virtual.
Do you think there may be some combination in the future?
There might be.
Yeah.
But I think in terms of the outreach, because we're able to serve more, because there isn't that room constraint, that this works better. And also because oftentimes, because of the schedule with these guys, is that they're more inclined to want to participate, because sometimes guys will get off work. I don't want to drive over there. I don't want to come here, and they won't. But there's no excuse not to show up on your phone or on your tablet or on your laptop.
Yeah.
So in terms of participating and finishing on time, we're getting a better result virtually than we did when we were in person.
Yeah, that's right.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you so much, James, and thank you everyone for being here. We're coming up on the hour, and I want to respect everyone's time. Make sure that you mark your calendar for April the 19th. We are going to work really hard to have an in-person event, and I'm very excited about that. I'll be sending out more details soon, but just hold that date for us, and we'll look forward to hopefully seeing everyone in person then. And as always, if you have any questions, comments, anything you want to share, don't hesitate to get in touch with me and let me know what I can do to help you. And thank you all, because your commitment to Hartley House is what makes us be able to do this work. And the work is incredibly important. So thank you. Have a wonderful day. Thank you again, James and Inga, for being here. I appreciate it.
Thank
Take
you.
care all. Be well.